I'm going to talk a little bit about entrepreneuring. I'll start by talking about how it came about and then take you through some of the history. And later on, we'll do case histories in the federal government, but I'm going to start with some stories in industry. So next slide, please. So the origin of the idea came about. I was taking a course called the School for Entrepreneurs, or School for Entrepreneurs, and my mentor in that school, Bob Schwartz, whose picture seems almost blacked out there, he said, well, there are 4 big opportunities for entrepreneurs. He said chips, by which he meant IT, bugs, by which he meant biotechnology, helping people to be multi-stringed instruments, by which he meant using all our talents at work, and entrepreneurship inside large organizations. I said, what is that? He said, I have no idea. He said, but I know there's something there. And so I went away, and with my wife, I wrote a paper on intracorporate entrepreneurship in the fall of 1978 and coined the word entrepreneur at that time. A group in Sweden called the Foresight Group picked up on that paper. They were visiting in the School for Entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. And they put the paper in the hands of Norman McRae at the London Economist, who wrote a 3-page article in The Economist called Intrapreneurial Now, in which he credited me with coming up with the term. And that spread. The Christian Science Monitor picked it up, and so it began going from there. Next. So then Harper and Row came and asked me to write a book on the topic, and I wrote Intrapreneuring, Why You Don't Have to Leave the Corporation to Become an Entrepreneur. Subsequent later books on that. Next. And the corporations reached out and asked me to help them figure out how to be more innovative. So I got to work for over half of the Fortune 100 and had a good time of it. Actually, it was a lot of fun running around the world, speaking on every continent except Antarctica in a single year and so forth. Yeah, everybody has their moment in the sun, right? Next. So entrepreneuring is in a big resurgence right now. And so why is that? Well, there are several reasons for that. One is there's a growing need for innovation. We need it in the federal government because we have declining budgets and increasing missions, where we have to do more with less, and we have to be very innovative to figure out how to actually serve the public more effectively, despite whatever budget cuts we're facing. It's in the corporate world, we have faster change. We have basically the export of many, many jobs. And what does that mean? If we're exporting jobs, we're asking ourselves, what's left for people in the advanced nations to do? And it turns out it's less and less analytic and more creative. If you have a simple analytic job, you can export that to India. Or you can have a computer do it for you. And so what we are seeing is the decline of a whole class of jobs. And what's left is the things which people do best, which is to care. You know, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want some robot to whir up and say, how are we feeling today, Mr. Pinchot? I'm not sure I will be as, I'm not sure that will work quite as well as a real person caring about me. And innovating. These are the 2 things that people can do that machines can't do. And so we'll see those jobs. The other piece of this is the nature of millennials. The millennials are asking very different things of their employers. They're saying, I don't want a boss standing over me telling me what to do. I want to make a difference early on in my career. I want to be creative. I want to actually serve my values. If I care about diversity, I want to be working to increase diversity. If I care about the environment, I want to be working to make the environment a better place. And all these demands actually make entrepreneuring the perfect job category for millennials, because it's a chance to make a difference, self-guided, using your own values to choose what it is that you want to be in service of. And so it has become kind of iconic in the millennial world to talk about intrapreneuring. Next. So I'm going to talk about how innovation actually happens next. So first we'll talk about what innovation is. It's coming up with new ideas, to be sure, but it's also about implementing those ideas. And it's very important to recognize that the real barrier to innovation is not in coming up with ideas. Most of us have enough good ideas in a week to last a lifetime, but we can only move forward on a very few of them. Most of the good ideas you ever have will die without being tried. But that doesn't have to be a tragedy if you actually get to do some things that are meaningful to you and you can say, yeah, I really accomplished something. And so intrapreneuring is about that, committing yourself to actually doing something. Next slide, please. So what you see here is that I've made the ideas small and the doing something big. And we see that innovation is really the combination of creativity and implementation. And what I'm asking you to think about is how do we make the implementation part work as well as the creative part. And I know that there are, every organization has an immune system whose purpose is to stomp out new ideas, and that you're facing all sorts of barriers when it comes to moving your ideas forward. But it's probably not that much harder actually to do it in the federal government than it is to do it out there in the real world. I've been an entrepreneur at various times in my life, and you know, the banks are not necessarily totally friendly to your new ideas. There's all kinds of problems that you face wherever you are with new ideas. So I would urge you to think, actually, this can be done. Lots of innovation has come out of the federal government, and you get to play this game. Next. So one of the reasons we have trouble with innovation is the things we've been taught. I was taught this: set your goals, plan for a long time to figure out exactly how to make it happen. Then when you finally got the plan perfect, put it into action. Hopefully the variances from plan are almost nothing, because that's how we tell good managers, right? A good manager, everything comes out according to plan. Unfortunately, that has almost nothing to do with the way innovation actually happens. Next, please. Here we have a more accurate picture of how innovation actually happens. We set out to do something. It turns out it doesn't work the way we were thinking about it, so we have to make changes. We make mistakes and have to recover from those mistakes. And finally, we end up doing something which is a little different than what we set out to do, but we somehow have saved the idea of making this innovation happen. Probably still addresses the basic vision that we had, but probably is very different from the plan that we had. And I'll give you an example. James Gosling, a programmer at Sun Microsystems, came up with a vision of a universal remote which had a graphic user interface. So this was a new idea at that time, and his idea was, you know, you click on a TV guide, flip through the pages, grab a program, drag it over, drop it on the video recorder, and bang, you've programmed your video recorder, and so forth. He went to Toys R Us, bought a little Game Boy, smashed it, took out the display, hooked it up with a chip, and built a prototype of this and took it to management. And they looked at it and they said, you know, that's very clever, James, but it's not really what we're looking for. We don't do consumer products. We only do back office server type things, and we wouldn't know how to do this, so stop. James did not give up. He was checking into his hotel room and he noticed that there was a microprocessor in the doorknob. And then he looked around and saw there was a microprocessor in the refrigerator and the alarm clock and the microwave. And everywhere he looked, there was another microprocessor. And he said, what if I use this operating system, which I developed, to put together every microprocessor in the world, and now they could all talk to each other, and think how much more efficient society would be. And he brought this idea to management, and they said no. But James did not give up. He continued on, and the next thing that happened is that they Sun decided to go into the set-top box businesses, those boxes which convert the cable signal. And they put somebody else in charge, which is the normal mistake that people make. They take the entrepreneur out of the action when they get serious and give it to some bureaucratic hack that has a good reputation but not good enough to run something real, and gave them a glass tower with lots of fancy furniture in it, which is the kiss of death for new ideas, and because you think you've already succeeded, whereas actually the job is yet to be done. And, well, not surprisingly, it failed. And so James was wandering around by now, a little discouraged, and a HR executive said, wait a second, here's some real talent in this organization. And she made a place for him and his team in the R&D labs and just said, let's just give them a little money and let them play for a little bit and see what happens. And Bill Joy, the chief technical officer of Sun, happened to wander into that lab, and he said, I know what this is. This is the operating system for the internet. And so Java was born. And so there's a long path from a better universal remote to Java. But that's the way innovation actually takes place. When we actually do the case histories of breakthrough innovation, we find that there is a very twisted path from where it began and where it ends up. And the factor which is actually making that all work is the determination and persistence of the entrepreneurs who simply would not accept failure. Does that make sense? And so we think that we're going to put some process in place to make innovation happen. Actually, it's about a relationship between the entrepreneurs and the people who are supporting them inside the organization that actually makes innovation work. Next, please. So if we look at what goes on in corporations, corporate venture analysis is interesting. We know that corporate venture groups fail, that almost inevitably within 5 years there's a flood of red ink and they close the place down. Why is that? Well, one reason is the way in which they're analyzing business ideas. They're saying, what's the projected return on investment? What does the market research say? Is this technically feasible? Does it? These are all questions about the idea, right? Next. What the venture capitalists say is, I'd rather have a Class A entrepreneur with a Class B idea than a Class A idea with a Class B entrepreneur. Who wants to do it, and what is their emotional relationship with the idea, and what are the skills which they bring to this, are much more important than exactly what they start out doing. And you could see this in Steve Jobs, right? It was very clear that as an entrepreneur, Steve Jobs had the special sauce that is necessary to seize victory out of the jaws of defeat. I mean, when he came back to Apple, Apple was going under. And all of a sudden, it began flourishing again and became the most successful company in the United States. That's because of who he was and his vision and his persistence and his courage to do things which seem crazy to other people. Next. So what we see in large organizations is that we have things in the idea phase. We have R&D, we have scientists, we have researchers and so forth, planners who are coming up with ideas. And once we get over here, we have growth business managers, mature business managers, cash cow managers, and so forth, all kinds of people who deal with existing businesses. But there's a gap that has to be crossed. And so the problems that we see in getting, for example, return on investment in R&D have to do not with the fact that the researchers are not coming up with good stuff. It's that there's no one to carry those ideas over into commercial reality. And what we have to do in organizations is make space for the entrepreneurs to actually turn the great ideas and the great scientific breakthroughs into something of real value. Next. Poor William Sauder wrote this book. He spent 10 years studying life cycle study, of 289 innovations in 53 different companies, and he came back a very discouraged man. He was hoping to have found the secret to innovation, a little process that you could put in place in your organization that would somehow miraculously make innovation happen. And he said, the only thing that I could find that was consistent among the innovations that succeeded was the presence of a passionate entrepreneur. Now, he missed something. The entrepreneur is not enough. The sponsors are also important, the people who are protecting the entrepreneurs, and the team is also important. But he was onto a basic idea that this is about people more than it is about ideas. Next. Nature of the entrepreneur. Next. So my mentor, Bob Schwartz, defined entrepreneurs as the dreamers who do. They have their head in the clouds and their feet firmly planted on earth, and they roll up their sleeves and get it done. We have lots of people who are good talkers. That's not enough. We have to have people who are actually able to make the system respond and get stuff done. And so that very rolled up sleeves aspect of the entrepreneur is an important thing to keep in mind, as well as the seeing into the future and seeing what needs to be done. Next. So this is a story about one of my graduates, Elizabeth Whalen. She was just starting grad school, and she wandered into the laboratory and discovered a new soy-based glue that had performance characteristics that were suitable for making plywood. She was working for Columbia Forest Products, which is the largest producer of hardwood plywoods in the US. And she said, this is a great thing because the existing glues were formaldehyde-based glues, and formaldehyde is a carcinogen. And so the people in the plant were getting cancer, and the customers were getting cancer when the plywood was installed in their homes. And she said, we could stop doing this. Wouldn't this be a great thing? It does seem sort of like a good idea, right? And she had that deep purpose at that point, which was getting rid of formaldehyde glues. Next. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite as easy as you might think. The people in manufacturing rose up against her and said, look, we've been using formaldehyde glues for I forget how many decades, but lots. There's nothing wrong with them. They seem to work. They're code, so there's no resistance to them in the marketplace. Why would we change? And they began making life difficult for her inside the company, but it didn't stop there. The people, the industry press, decided that she was trying to destroy the plywood industry and began publishing scurrilous articles about her and her personality and why she was doing what she was doing and so forth. So she was receiving what you might say is a relatively large amount of resistance, right? So there she was. No, back, please. There she was. She's saying, I'm not sure how I continued. I was pregnant. I got pregnant at this point. I had a full-time job. I was in school. It just seemed like too much. And she said the reason I continued was because I knew it wouldn't happen without me. And I think that's a position that a lot of entrepreneurs find themselves in. They don't need to imagine themselves taking on a challenge like that, but there's something that they care about so deeply that they just decide that if the only way to do it is to commit themselves to it, that they're going to. And so that's part of what, as entrepreneurs, I want to say to you is don't take on any entrepreneurial project unless it's deeply embedded in your heart. You owe it to your employer not to do that because you will surely fail if it's not deeply embedded in your heart. And you owe it to yourself not to do it because you will also fail, and that's not good for your career, and it's not a lot of fun either. So you have the right to say, I'm not going to do something really innovative and new unless I care about it. And you have, in fact, the responsibility to do that. Next. So what did she do? She went to California and she began hammering on the EPA, California EPA, and she put together a coalition of 15 nonprofits, health-oriented nonprofits, to help her with this job of hammering on the California EPA. And in the end, the California EPA basically made a ban on formaldehyde glues. Now, this was kind of interesting from a business point of view because now Columbia Forest Products was the only company that could sell plywood in California. And you might imagine that that was actually good for the bottom line, right? But it was also really good for Elizabeth because she discovered the fulfillment of a deep purpose. She transformed the whole plywood industry. They licensed the glues to others. And she went away saying, I will never in my life accept a job in which I can't make a real difference. This is what I get to do. Next. Some of the things that helped her, that meaningful purpose gave her the determination. She was, as many entrepreneurs have to do, looking at the whole system rather than just pieces of the system. She had to look at the whole society, figure out the nonprofits, figure out how to link with the inventors, et cetera, et cetera. She had to put that whole system together. Next. So there are a bunch of myths about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are driven by greed, high risk takers, intuitive, and so forth, dishonest. None of those are true, as it turns out. Next. That's important because I don't think you would want to be an entrepreneur if those were the characteristics, right? So it turns out that entrepreneurs are driven by vision and values, and they keep score with money, that's true, but it's not quite the same thing as having that be the reason that they're doing it. The reason that they're doing it is coming from a deeper place in their, and here's another great surprise, they are moderate risk takers. The high risk takers don't succeed as entrepreneurs and don't succeed as entrepreneurs. They choose challenging objectives, but then they manage risk very effectively, and they find ways to reduce risk. And that's an important part of what they do. They're not purely intuitive. They're not just guessing what to do. They are intuitive and analytic, and it turns out you need both sides of the brain to be a successful entrepreneur. And this is something you can work on. If you're more analytic than intuitive, you should work a little bit on releasing your intuition. If you're more intuitive than analytic, begin practicing being somewhat analytic, because you will need both. And they are honest rule benders, which makes the bureaucrats think they're dishonest, but actually what they're doing is often being scrupulously honest. And it's something that you can look for if you're a sponsor. If your entrepreneur is not telling you the truth, you really don't want to continue backing them. And finally, they're coming from, well, I like to call it an internal compass. They make up their own mind about what needs to be done, and very, very persistent. Next. There is a group of people who looks exactly like the myths of the entrepreneurs. They're called promoters. They are driven by greed, which means looking for a promotion if you're a federal employee. They are high risk takers with your money. They are intuitive and dishonest, and these are the ones that you want to avoid. In fact, what you have as a venture capitalist, your most important skill is the ability to tell entrepreneurs from promoters. If you can do that, you'll have a pretty good investment result, and if you can't, you're basically hooped. Next. So what is an entrepreneur? An employee takes on the role like that of an entrepreneur. And here's one I really like, a self-appointed general manager of a new idea. If you look at Elizabeth, she appointed herself the head of the Pure Bond, what became the Pure Bond Initiative, and she did whatever she had to do in order to get it to move forward. Next. Here's another couple of my students, Jeff Wiggin and Chi Pak. Chi Pak was head of sustainability for T-Mobile, and he hated the fact that phones were being thrown into the wastebasket and shipped to China. Perfectly good phones, but he couldn't get T-Mobile to do anything about it. So he talked to his friend Jeff Wiggin, who was chief information officer at T-Mobile, and they couldn't figure out together what to do about it because there was no money available for refurbishing phones. Until Jeff found somebody who wanted to start an insurance business at T-Mobile. Now, everybody else had insurance on your phone if you dropped it in the toilet or whatever went wrong, but T-Mobile did not. And they couldn't get it to pencil out. The cost of the phones was too high. And so they put all that together and said, what if we used all these phones that people are turning in to fulfill our insurance obligations? Would the insurance business suddenly start making money? And in fact, they built a billion-dollar business doing that. Next. But they had phones left over. There were more phones being turned in than they needed for the insurance business. So what to do with them? Next. This is when T-Mobile came up with a whole idea of a new phone plan in which you buy the cell phone service separately from the phone. You can buy a brand new phone, and it's going to be more or less like an AT&T pricing. But if you buy a used phone, it's a lot cheaper. And in any case, at the end of 2 years, you don't have to pay for the phone anymore because you've already done that. Next. So T-Mobile went from losing 500,000 customers a quarter to gaining 1.3 million, now 2.3 million. They went from going out of business to being a force in the industry. And I like this story because it illustrates the importance of purpose and the importance of determination. These guys did not give up. And because they were pursuing something which they considered to be a deep heart issue, namely sustainability in this case, they brought something to the company which was of great value in the financial sense. And we as innovators probably care more about issues like alleviating poverty and making the world something that we can leave to our children than we do about making a huge amount of money or meeting budget. That money stuff is at a less deep level in our hearts. And so if you want employees to actually go through the process of innovating, you have to let them hook up with what really matters to them. Next. Go. So, yeah, one next. Couple of hints. You have an idea, you want to move it forward. One, ask for advice before you ask for resources. So I come to Stephanie here and I say, I've got this great idea and I need a head count of 3 and a budget of $1 million. Please give it to me now. What's going to happen? No. She's going to say no, right? Now I'm going to go away and you're going to have to figure out what just happened. And what happened is that you said no to an idea. Now there's 2 possibilities. That was a good idea and you said no to it and you're a bad manager, or it was a bad idea and you said no to it and you're a good manager. Which of those do you suppose you choose? Yeah, well, there is that, and I'm a little short of time, so pretend that I explained my idea better. But, yeah, so you choose bad manager, and, I mean, you choose good manager, and therefore my idea is bad, right? So that didn't work. Now let me try something different. Hey, Stephanie, I need some help. I need to go talk to somebody in marketing. I've got this idea. I don't know quite yet whether it's good or bad. Can you help me with that and tell me someone to go to?
Yes, I can.
So now you've helped me. You've said yes to my idea and a very small idea, so my idea just got a little better, right? Now I go away and I ask Amin to help me out and he gives me some good advice. And I come back to you and I say, Stephanie, I express gratitude. Thank you so much. You don't know how much you've helped me. Well, if you've helped me a lot, my idea is even better, right? So gratitude is a very powerful way of moving your idea forward through the system. It can even take people who are opposed to you and turn them around. They appear to be attacking you, but you thank them. Let you go away, think about it, come back and thank them because their advice was actually useful. Again, you're bringing them over on your side. The other thing that you need is a coalition of sponsors. More than one person who supports you. Yes, next. Another couple of hints. When you want to move your idea forward, a wonderful thing to say is, this doesn't matter. Not what you might think, right? Stephanie, this doesn't matter. It's only a test. So the decision that you're going to have to make is actually in the future, and you should be testing it before you make that decision. And so this is it becomes very natural to say yes under those circumstances, right? And then when all else fails, rename and press on. So you, next. A couple of words about the School for Entrepreneurs. We've been doing it for 29 years and launched over 800 products and businesses. Next. Next, next. Start with a fair so that we bring out lots of ideas. Next. Then we run the school itself, and it has 3 purposes: to go from an employee mindset to an entrepreneurial mindset, from a group to a high-performance team, from a concept to a business plan. Next. Bunch of courses that are in that, and I think my time is up. Thank you very much.